Hello and welcome to this ET Now special. I'm Nayantara Rai joining you from Washington, D.C. and my guest today is the Finance Minister, Jaitley. Thank you, Mr. Jaitley, for talking to us here on ET Now. We've literally been following you on this three-city visit over the last 5 days. Would you say it's been a successful trip to America?
Well, I think since I have to come twice every year to attend the fund bank meetings, I use this opportunity for an outreach. And two very important outreaches always are either the universities and also the potential investors, the business community, the chambers and so on. And of course, on the sidelines of the fund bank meetings, you get to meet finance ministers from all over the world, particularly those countries with whom we have a special relationship. And therefore, I've used this for addressing almost a dozen or so gatherings in the last 6 days, and had several bilaterals besides the fund bank meeting itself. And I go back with the satisfaction that there is a very large appreciation of the fact that India is probably one of the few countries in the world which in otherwise a globally adverse environment still had the capacity to undertake structural reforms. And I think this is a fact which almost the whole body of investors acknowledges, as also a very large number of my counterparts in other parts of the world.
In fact, Mr. Jaitley, when we are in India, the theme, the main flavor is an economic slowdown, that 5.7% GDP figure in the first quarter. In the last 5 days, when we've been covering this, your visit to the United States, all the global economists that I've interviewed, the global investors I've interviewed, they are on a totally different page from the Indian investors and the Indian economists. They're extremely bullish. Why this dichotomy? Why do you think this exists?
I'll tell you the reason. The reason is comments in India have come primarily from two sections. They have come from either the Congress party or its leaders, those who were in power and did not undertake any reforms or changes, maintained the status quo and gave to this country a government which was known for policy paralysis. Or they have come from those who were in the BJP and for some reasons are not very happy today, not for any ideological reasons, but for reasons which I've already expressed myself when I was in India. I don't want to sit here and repeat those reasons. The immaturity of those reactions is that when you undertake major structural reforms, India is in a situation that we are growing between 7 and 8% 3 years in a row, which is the highest growth rate any major economy had. And therefore, that is what gives you the confidence to undertake structural reforms. You can slip by a percentage point or so for a quarter or two, and then you can pick up again. So these are challenges of a transient nature. A GST is bound to throw up a challenge in a transient nature, because local manufacturing will will dip a little because people will destock. And then once the new tax regime comes into play, they'll start manufacturing in the new tax regime.
Which is exactly what the International Monetary Fund has also said, that India is going to be the fastest growing economy in 2018.
Economists world over realize this as a reality, that this is a consequence of structural changes, that you'll have a slight hiatus as far as manufacturing is concerned. Same is the position when you switch over and try and formalize the economy by assaulting a shadow economy by a major step like demonetization. You'll have a gap period itself. Now, this gap period is not going to be years. This gap period doesn't take your economy into the negative area. You still remain a high 5.5%, 5.7%, 6.1% for 1 or 2 quarters, and thereafter you start catching up again. And it's quite evident that now every indication which is coming indicates exports growing by 26%, PMIs in services and manufacturing both turning positive, IIP figures are good, inflation figures are moderate, core sector growth is reasonably high, and therefore these are all indications of a higher level of growth returning back to India. These are preliminary indications, but nonetheless important indications. And if this is coupled with the fact that growth is returning to the world, and therefore that's going to impact two sectors. One is demand, and one is exports.
Right.
And both of which are vital as far as India is concerned.
Which is what, and the impression in India certainly does not seem to be here in the United States in the last 5 days, is the sense I got in my interviews. And the transient nature which you spoke about, which the International Monetary Fund has also spoken about, saying that we will see an 8% plus growth in the medium term. But the fact, Mr. Jaitley, is that there is still some deep-rooted problems in the economy. For example, the bad loans. The bad loans.
Of course.
And insolvency, bankruptcy code, yes. Can we expect more measures?
Well, I think, you see, there are still challenges. There are challenges of NPAs. The IBC is addressing that challenges, but there is a challenge of strengthening the capacity of the banks to support growth. That's something which we are looking at, as I have said, at a very advanced stage, and we are likely to take some decision in the matter. There is a challenge of
qualitative or quantitative recap?
We'll certainly give you the details once we take a decision. There is a question of bumping up the domestic investment. I think in the last 1 quarter, one of the positives was that positive investment even by the private sector has started. There's a curve which is turning. And therefore, if this trend continues, it should augur well for the future.
Something else I want to ask you is that while we've been here, the US President has tabled a proposal for a new visa regime, which is going to be based on merit and not lottery system. Do you think this will augur well for the Indian professionals?
Well, that's the case that in my discussion with both the Treasury and the Commerce secretaries I've made out, that Indians are not some illegal economic migrants here. These are very high quality, highly trained professionals. They've contributed immensely to the US economy, and therefore they add value to the US economy. And therefore, when the US decides its own visa policy, they must decide in relation to these people appropriately.
Okay. And you discussed the visa regime, and the mission clearly is also to hit $500 billion in trade. Do you see that mark being hit anytime soon? It's going to be primarily from defense companies, which is where the...
Well, I think if areas like defense, areas like civil aviation, which are very high investment areas, if you see investments pouring into those areas, then obviously it's going to have some impact.
Did you discuss Air India with them? There is a plan to privatize Air India.
We're still in the process of taking a decision.
Okay, so moving on from that, I just want to ask you a little bit about the fisc. Enough is being said about it back home. The early macroeconomic indications which have come while you've been in the United States are certainly very encouraging. But I would imagine that the spectrum auction is not going to be very successful. The RBI has given you a big cut in the dividend.
We'll deal with the situation. We are still in the middle of the year, so please wait till the end.
And disinvestment?
Well, I think we are on target.
You're on target, 72,000 crore rupees. My final question to you that I'm going to ask you is just to do with another rhetoric back home, which has to do with job creation. Now, it's not your job, I know, to create jobs, but do you think it's been over-exaggerated?
No, it's a concern. It's a legitimate concern. When the economy grows, you'll certainly find more jobs created.
We're back in conversation with the Finance Minister, Arun Jaitley. It is his last day here in the United States, a 3-city visit, 5 days in all. Mr. Jaitley, you know, at Harvard University, you said that at the next GST Council meet next month, there is a discussion that's going to take place to bring real estate into the GST net, whether it should happen or not. Obviously, ideally, that should be the situation. But do you think the states will concur it is a cash cow for them, real estate?
No, you see, I think it's an area which is still an area of a huge evasion. And it will be in larger interest not only of the revenue but also of the final consumers. Let us assume that 12% GST is payable on a property, and the whole of the property gets into the GST. Then for every input, cement, steel, electrical fittings, sanitation fittings, that you've paid the tax, you'll get a deduction. Since these are high taxed items, you probably, the consumer, you'll get the input credit, you'll pay nothing. But the whole chain will come within the tax net, and therefore transactions will be in official money. I think for any country which aspires to become a developed nation, which aspires to be a fast-growing economy, it's absolutely necessary that you should lay down exemplary standards, and therefore several state governments have now said, why not bring GST into real estate into the GST, and therefore it's an item it's only at a discussion stage. Ultimately, it's the states and the center which has to collectively decide this issue.
The other cash cow is, of course, petroleum, which is not in the GST net. The center, of course, did that excise duty cut to protect the customer.
Some state governments have also done it.
Yes, we've seen Gujarat,
and now the test is, the Congress and the CPM and the Aam Aadmi were saying, oh, the oil prices have gone up. Then why are your states not reducing the VAT? Why are they still charging 30 and 40% each?
Yeah.
That's the real test. Please reduce it by 2% or 4% so that there is some relief to the consumers.
So after real estate, do you think there will be a conversation around petroleum?
I think it's an open issue. We have not discussed the issue as yet, and therefore I am not in a position to make a final comment on this.
Mr. Jaitley, you've undertaken the most landmark reform in indirect taxation, GST. Can we expect anything monumental in this tenure of the government as far as direct taxes go?
Let's see what has happened in direct taxes. Today, more than 99% of all individual tax returns are being filed online. Queries are being addressed online. Assessment orders are coming online. And 99% of the returns are being accepted as they are filed. It's only 1% which goes into scrutiny. Refunds are today intimated to you. Small amounts come online, big amounts follow through a check comes through the speed post immediately. So this whole institution of inspectors visiting you, you are being called by the assessing authority on the smallest pretext, monies have to exchange hands, then with a refund a clerk will come and charge his kickback. I think all that is over. So procedurally we have made tax filing a one-page exercise for individual tax returns. Secondly, I had announced that we need to be globally competitive, and therefore, as far as businesses and corporate taxes are concerned, we have to bring it down to 25%. Last year, up to 50 crores, I brought it down to 25%. So the SMEs are gradually coming into this area. So 95% or 96% of all companies in India today are only paying 25% tax, which is a globally very compatible kind of a rate. And therefore, that's a reform which I am working on.
But what about the personal income tax rate? As the tax base widens, isn't there a scope to perhaps lower the burden?
We are one of the lowest personal income taxes in the world. To get people into the tax base, the entry point tax is 5%. We are the only country in the world which has a 5% slab. No country in the world has a 5% slab. And therefore, the country also needs revenue. Revenue is the lifeline of governance. We obviously can't go about saying, oh, I won't even charge that. Then how will the country run?
And after demonetization, I'm sure you've been, and the tax department has discovered that there are people who were not paying tax.
You see, as on 31st March 2017, the number of people into the income tax net as such who have come is something close to 6.22 crores. There's been a big jump. And I think by 30th September, when the figures come out, this figure would have increased even more.
But the point I was trying to make was they must have seen certain trends where the income was not matching the spending, the kind of deposits that were being made in the banks.
I think two things of this. One, as far as demonetization deposits are concerned, 1.8 million people are on the radar who had disproportionate deposits. And secondly, I think the fact that returns now require Aadhaar number, and that's been upheld by the Supreme Court. And therefore, Aadhaar, and one of the judges in the privacy case has also said that larger interest of revenue is an exception to the law of privacy. You can't continue spending in cash and say, I won't tell you, this is a private matter. You are ultimately duping the state. And therefore, I think if this experiment is further continued, it can make a substantial improvement.
You know, Dr. Arvind Subramanian is not here, but you might have been delighted to hear what the IMF had to say, which is that India should adopt the universal basic income and be fiscally prudent. You in the past have said it's a great idea, but it's politically not feasible. But now Madhya Pradesh, for example, is experimenting with it in a few districts.
I'll slightly amend what you are saying. I've always maintained that Arvind's idea of a UBI in India is a very good idea. Politically, knowing the level at which, you've seen the level at which the GDP debate in this country operated. People who are completely ignorant, they can defy all facts and rationality and start arguing. They will say, oh, please give UBI but continue the existing subsidies. Now that's something which is not possible. You have people pretending to be economists who will say abolish income tax. Very popular, but then how will the country run? So I don't want it to, the debate has to have a certain level of maturity. UBI will be a substitute to all forms of subsidies. So that you will put somebody in Punjab did a calculation just now and met me and said if you abolished all center and state subsidies in Punjab and instead the people below a certain level in Punjab, let's say 40% of the families, were to be given a check every year, each family would receive ₹1 lakh.
1 lakh to the needy,
per
40%
year,
of the
per
population.
Per year. There's some calculations came. I'm not vouching for that calculation, but that's what the idea is. The Jammu and Kashmir finance minister tells me he's willing to experiment it. You say Madhya Pradesh is willing to experiment it. At the end of the day, when you have a direct benefit transfer through cash, ultimately this is a movement in that direction.
You think it will happen in your
I think it's let the DBTs move on. Let those payments which are not within the DBT come within the DBT, and ultimately you pay the market prices so that there is no kind of subversion as far as the market is concerned. But then you get a cash in your bank to operate. So even if there is no crop that year, you still have some sustenance money which has come into your bank account.
Your predecessor, Mr. Chidambaram, this week has been talking about food security because of this index released globally where India has dropped 3 spots and come at number 100.
You see, let's be very clear. The Congress party must introspect. India's ranking in these areas is historical. And if 55 years Congress has been in power, Mr. Chidambaram must first question his own party. What is the kind of governments they have run from 1947 onwards? If this is the position, you don't expect the whole world to alter within 3 years. This is a historical culmination of the misdeeds of the Congress that the country came to this situation. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we are today spending more money on food security than the Congress party in any year ever did. You are somewhere close to over 1,40,000 crores, almost close to 1,50,000 crores. The Congress was nowhere near that money.
And while we're talking about the Congress, in this 1 week, a lot of events, we've seen what happened with Pranab Mukherjee, what Dr. Manmohan Singh has had to say, now Rahul Gandhi's elevation.
Well, I was, I've been here, I read about it, but I found it a sad reflection on Indian democracy. That two of the most distinguished people in India, one a former president and one a former prime minister, had to say that we were waiting, will I get it or will somebody, the other gentleman get it? So as though this was an empress selecting a regent, and who's the nominated regent? Is this how for 10 years the government of India operated? Let us take both these statements to be true. And on the premise that both the gentlemen who made these statements are extremely honorable people, they've held the highest offices in the country, and they were waiting for an empress to nominate a regent who will keep the seat warm till a member of the dynasty is eligible to take over.
And now his time has come?
Well, that is, if you translate this debate into simple language, this is what it means.
And it's a dilution of democracy is what your
Well, I think it's a very disturbing trend for a mature democracy.
If I could just come back to economics, you met some global investors, and I touched on this point with you earlier. Such a different debate around the economy overseas in the United States as opposed to what's happening in India. Are you at least seeing some signs of a revival in private sector investments back home?
Well, there is an improvement. There is an improvement. There's an improvement in the global economy. There's an improvement in the global demand. And obviously, that's going to also impact on India.
And you also met investors like, for example, John Flannery of GE. I'm singling him out because GE has been in the news in India about a $2.5 billion possible cancellation, the locomotive one.
Well, nobody said. I think Mr. Piyush Goyal has clarified it adequately. There is no question of cancelling this contract itself. At the same time, GE should also not expect that India will not experiment with electrification, which is ecologically a much better way to run your railways. And therefore, modernization will involve electrification. But at the same time, there is a contract in place. And the last thing that India wants in this environment is that we get an image of a country which breaches contracts. We don't want to do that.
And while you've been here, the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council had its first meeting, they had a press conference, they've come out with 10 points, and one big one is job creation. What can be done? You are, of course, trying to get investments.
Well, I think in India, when economy grows, you'll have jobs in the structured sector. You'll have an expansion even of the small and medium scales, etc. But bulk of the jobs in India are created by the SMEs, they are created by micro industries, they are created by self-employment. Gone are the days where only government sector created jobs in the government or the organized sector created jobs. And therefore, you have to have a skilling campaign which is going on, and therefore you have to deal with it at various levels.
My final question to you, I'm not going to ask you about a fiscal stimulus because you'll say that's a media creation. My question to you is, could we expect a package maybe for SMEs which are in want of capital?
You will get a response from us to whatever is required, and that's the word I've consistently used.
Thank you, Mr. Jaitley, for giving us the time. Thank you.